This is Writer Life, a podcast about writing, life, coffee and conversation with Rob and John Morgan.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Writer Life. Today, because I've now got 3 books published, I want to talk about the Curio Chronicles, because currently the 4th book in the series is now being prepared for publication. And for the series, this really is a pivotal turning point in what is the overall story of the Curio group, and especially for the life of Abigail. Now, when I first wrote the series, which was back in 2020, where I literally wrote 5 books in 6 months, and as I wrote them back to back, and my sole aim at that time was to write the truth of a life. And in this particular story, it was going to be Abigail's life, written from her own viewpoint. I always knew that for some people the books would be controversial to some, because having spent well over 25 years of my life talking to many different kinds of age groups and people, in the role of a counsellor, I had a huge wealth of information and insight into the lives of many generations. And I wanted to showcase that in the series, which is what I did, as I pitted many contrasting views and opinions against each other. I knew the books were going to be honest, irreverent, and quite blatant from page 1. I had every intention of writing the truth of those I'd spent hundreds of hours in deep conversations with. And I wanted to not just use extracts from their stories, which I gave to the characters that I created. I also wanted to use their words, which did involve sexual and also some crude language. Now, the story had to be up to date and as accurate as possible, because I really wanted to use Wootton Dursley, the village that the stories are set in and evolve around, to be a very realistic reflection of society and the modern world, which involved highlighting a lot of the fakery and pain that was caused by the direction of what I now see as modern society and the direction in which it's moving. I mean, it's quite odd really, because since I wrote these books, which was 3 years ago, I do feel society has got worse, especially in the area of shaming others. Something that I know from my own life of watching and working with people is, how so much is hidden from us. And a lot of what actually happens in life is especially hidden from view. And in many cases, it is because it's quite abusive and it's oppressive. I know a great deal about abusive relationships. I've had many deep and long conversations with those on the receiving end of them. And I've seen the two-faced fakery of parents, husbands and wives who have to a degree hidden their crimes behind a fake smile as they painted a picture of perfection at home. So for myself, writing Abigail's story was not actually that difficult, because I have this huge wealth of information which is based on years of intense conversations right at my fingertips. Now, there's a wonderful line that states, "Some of the most honest things are often said in jest." And it really is quite relevant to life, and especially when used with sarcasm. People do it all the time. They make a joke which is really actually insulting and not that funny. And if I had to place it in some form of stereotypical context, which I don't like doing, I will say that I've heard a great many women say something really derogatory and then smile. It was actually quite telling about the way their husbands behaved at home, and they were not happy about it. These digs are designed to wound, but they're delivered with a smile. And I do feel that they're far more frequent in modern relationships today than they used to be. In therapeutic practices, they're known as warm fuzzies or cold pricklies, depending on what's being said. A nice compliment would be a warm fuzzy. A backhanded slight said with a smile, would be seen as a cold prickly. And it does appear that their use is far more prevalent now than ever before. I mean, it is a great delivery system, and it's one that I've employed from the start of writing, as I allowed Abby to have a constant internal dialogue as she went through her life, and her thoughts and observations became the focus of the narrative of the whole series. Now, not only did I use it as her context, because I knew at times this story would have darkness and topics that could be seen as controversial, I also used humour as a vehicle to move the story along to great effect. The whole series is a kind of a stream of giggles and tears, and more importantly, it is through that the observations of life are recorded, so that I can address many issues that happen within society, but do it more as a thought or in some form of a tongue-in-cheek fashion. I've used this approach in a more stifled and limited way in Heirs to the Kingdom, so for me it was not that hard to bring it more to the front and highlight it better as part of the main narrative when writing the Curio Chronicles. I found that the sneaky digs and giggles helped the pace of the books a lot better, which gave me some freedom to really get stuck into the stories and move them along with a kind of a fresh and fun feeling, but it added extra power to each of the characters. Now, most people would possibly refrain from this sort of style when writing. I think, to a degree, I feel there's been a sort of toning down of writers in the last 2 years. It's almost as if James Deakins, the literary critic who appears in book 3, is controlling modern writing. And I really wanted to get a story pulled together that was honest and showed the real nitty-gritty of parts of life within society today. So I kind of avoided sort of watering it down and did a full head-on assault. And that helped me sort of pull the story together, and it came across as being honest and showed the real nitty-gritty of parts of life. So that allowed me then to put in the darkness, the shame, the oppression. But I also wanted the fun, the stupidity, the sexual language and the joking as I wrote, and I tried really hard to kind of balance everything out to bring alive a very modern, contemporary feeling within the book that reflected life as it is, not so much as it was meant to be. Now, we may not like it, but within society and life today, sex, sexuality and sexual acts have become a focal point of life. You just take a step back and look. We've got porn, OnlyFans, sexual image sharing, scantily clad models, gurus, and web pages that are absolutely packed with information on how to do it better, how to last longer, or how to even guess it in the first place. The whole world evolves around the subject. Novels and films include it. Graphic novels really do show it. And in almost every gathering, you find it comes into the conversation at some point or another. Some social media may ban aspects of it, but it does not prevent it appearing as young people post half-dressed pictures and images to show off their toned bodies and sexy figures. Some clothing is brief, some of it so brief it does not hide any aspects of the wearer's imagination from pretty much working out the exact outline of all of the sexy bits. Now, the same can be said for dating apps, which feature some pretty close to the edge images as people flaunt their wares in order to win a date or a one-night stand or even a future partner. Everyone accepts it is now the way that things are done, and they will happily display themselves in ways probably 40 years ago and would be deemed as inappropriate or scandalous. But today it's actually become quite normalised. The media use sex with absolute brilliant skill to sensationalise everything. And no matter where you look, there are glamorous, sexy images to draw your attention to a product or a service. Celebrities take it to the extreme with see-through clothing on the red carpet. And there's even trends now on social media where we have young women wearing semi-transparent clothing, standing in the light, with a light behind them, so that you can see that they are actually underwear free and silhouetted to show the outline of their sexy bits. You can sit in your ivory towers and complain while doing it behind closed doors, but actually the fact remains that it is now the number one preoccupation of all teens who are constantly exposed to it, and it does remain a focal point through every generation today. Everybody wants some form of sexual fulfillment. They're either looking for it, yearning for it, or doing it. And, it is also the number one topic of boasting, titillation, heartbreak, and shaming. Anyone who wants to write a true representation of life will at some point have to confront it. And I have. And it's up there amongst all of the other many important aspects of the Curios and the hectic life that they live. I made a very, very real choice when I began this series to not hide it or allude to it. I chose to show it as it actually is and use it, as it is one of few themes that run throughout the whole series. It's not the only theme, but it is an important one. Now, it matters not if you agree or you disagree. That was really never my point. My point simply was to get as true a picture of the Curios' lives as possible. When I took what I've used to create the story of the Curios, subject matter-wise, I took every important aspect of the lives of others, and rather like kind of dividing up a cake, I sliced up the narrative into equal proportions of the subject matter, and then I served it up on a plate. Now, in the back of my mind, I was really interested in finding out how people would react. I really wanted to know if they could accept the narrative or would only focus on one of the details or subject matter, which would preoccupy their attention and prevent them from seeing the whole of the story in the context it was delivered in, or would they just get hung up on one single point? To really see if I was on the right path, I decided to do something that was quite new to me and use an aspect in my writing that with Kingdom I'd always watered down, and I made the decision very early on to include small aspects of graphic, descriptive writing of sex acts. Now, in my mind, if you're getting into a relationship, it is a part of life, and it's an important part of life, especially in the early days. And so, I felt it had its place, and so I wrote it into the stories. Now, if I'm honest, it's not something that I'm that comfortable with writing, but considering that I was writing a modern story based on a lot of very real life events, I decided to include aspects of acts that had been graphically described to me, some good, some bad, and some I put in as hearsay. I did try to water down the language that is used in description, because I'm not a fan of some of the words I read in modern books, and I did not want to really, use those kind of words. I mean, after all, for myself as the author, this was actually a very serious story, and I wanted it to be seen that way. I wanted that to show through everyone, just get those many different layers within the books revealed. In my mind, Abby was 19. She'd lived in a village at home that was oppressive. She'd been sheltered and kept away from pretty much most aspects of the real world. But she also went to a public high school, and so it was clear to me that, most of what she knew would be hearsay. So although she'd had some idea of sex and what it was, she really was actually a little naive and had not really been that sexual with others. As the story shows, she lost her virginity to James, who used her to have sex and then dumped her. So to a degree, she'd kind of been put off relationships by his actions, because, that actually hurt her very deeply, because she really did care about James. She felt at that time she was absolutely in love with him. Meeting Birch, who was pretty wild, openly sexual, and possibly the freest spirit in the university, to me it was pretty obvious that her influence, to a degree, would guide Abby into a life of parties and sleeping with others, and that became my starting point for Abigail's summer, as she'd just completed her first year at uni when the book actually began. She alludes to it that she had actually been far more sexual than she imagined she ever could be, which she clearly states in the opening passages of the book. Now, I wasn't sure at first if people would understand within the first 5 chapters how repressive her life had been. Would they understand how much her liberation and freedom really meant to her? She was clear she did not want to have any form of committed relationship whilst at university, and yet, she dove into the pool of hookup culture. Now, for her, it was a very, very liberating experience, and it began her own voyage of self-discovery, and it is actually a pretty normal aspect of uni life. It's just one that, to be honest, quite a lot of people don't really talk about. Now, at this point in the story, Abby's life is based on the true events of someone very similar to Abby. The girl in question was someone I worked with a long time ago, and yet she had always impressed me with her high intelligence and her resolute mindset on making the most of what for her was her newfound freedom and liberation away from her parents. She had 2 pretty wild years of fun, but she also understood the value of her education, and she worked and partied hard all through university. I met up with her a few years after I'd finished working with her, and we both went for a coffee and a bit of a catch-up. And I've got to say, the difference in her was startling. She'd left at this point her wild days behind her, and she'd settled down, and she was out of uni and had acquired a really good job, which allowed her then to move into her own place and live her life under her own rules, free of the interference of her family, which to a degree is what Birch and Abby do. She laughed and joked about some of her wilder sexcapades, but the thing that I really loved the most was she didn't regret them. For her, she found they gave her a better insight as to who she was and what she was actually capable of in life. And in a strange way, it did help her to overcome a great deal of her insecurities and anxiety. Now, for myself, as the writer of the book, that gave me a wonderful insight into her mind, which I could then gift to Abigail and use in her internal dialogue, which again, it adds more weight to the story overall. I suppose it's easy to read Abby's story and, like Marjorie, just sit in judgment of her. And it's here that I do ask a very, very important question of all of the readers, because I ask, well, what exactly is moral? It is a loaded question, as we see in Abigail's summer, because when we start the book, we see how moral and upstanding all of the villagers are, and yet it does appear that, especially with Birch, Abby and Chloe, their morals are probably a little bit looser than most, and they are used as a weapon against them. As the story plays out and the revelations about some of the sexual behaviour of the villagers become exposed, the story then starts to twist. And some things, there are some things going on that even the Curios appear to be a little bit too wild for even them. It's pretty much out there and they're not that into it. So what exactly is moral? Now, is it a vicar who's well into BDSM? Or, is it a wife who actually allows that? Do people with a urine fetish tick the immorality box, and is dope growing or swinging indecent? There is fraud, there's spousal abuse, and people like Abby and Birch living a naked lifestyle. As more things are revealed, the morality becomes more and more blurred to the reader. Because the simple truth is, out there in the real world of today, sex has moved into a whole host of kinks and fetishes that are completely accepted and tolerated. But it still happens only in the confines of somewhere behind closed doors. How it looks on the outside is indeed very different to what is actually happening on the inside. Abby actually voices it perfectly when she asks the question, is a threesome immoral if all the parties are consenting and enjoying themselves? Now, it is a really good question. And it's probably one that many older generations today struggle with. Whereas the young, they don't. They don't even consider it. They're happily experimenting and trying new things, which, for them, morality is of no concern, because all they're doing is ticking off a number of items on their bucket lists and living their lives to the full. So the truth is, they really do not care what the older generations think. In their mind, the older people had their time and lived it as they saw fit. And so the younger generations are doing exactly the same, but they're embracing far more than those of the past could ever imagine. And that really does present a challenge for much older readers. In book 1, Abby is 19. In the second book, she's 24, and she's in her prime of sexuality and youth. And so the book steps kind of up a notch, and it exposes more of the lifestyles of those who are freed of the bonds of their parents and are starting out living truly independent lives. Once again, I use real life examples to weave into this story, and even though these books may at times read as clearly being fictional, they're actually based on real life events. I just use incidents and acts from real life and then allowed my characters to live them. I was curious when book 2 came out, because I knew that this was going to be the most graphic book of the series, and so I asked myself if it was possible to see past the sex and really start to understand the reality of Abby's story. Was it possible to understand the mental effects of rape and the setbacks that it caused? Did people really understand the anxiety and self-doubt abusive parenting caused? And how would people react knowing that people do use date rape drugs to snare their victims, and at times it is a hell of a lot closer to home than people realise? Now, once again, I wrote true stories and blended them into the life of the Curios. Birch's nail polish that detects drugs in a drink is an actual product that you can actually buy. And as much as it may be funny or shocking to some, hospitals do have far more incidents of removing sex aids from people than you would actually realise. Melody's story is a true one. That actually happened in real life. And, as much as it may have appeared to be important in the book only to Birch and Abby, the fact remains that it is also a story that is far more frequent than you would believe. Girls have suffered because they passed out at a party, and yes, there are men out there that have taken advantage of that, and kids struggle to cope, and they become so desperate and lost in a world that they really do not understand. They make the decision to kill themselves. Between the giggles and the sexual innuendo, I've layered real and harrowing incidents from actual life. I was always clear these stories would hold a mirror up to the world and show it its own reflection. And that has been another of the themes that runs throughout all of these books. Using dialogue to convey messages from Abby to Birch in all of their conversations, I've taken what I witnessed and given them the freedom of all the pages to express their views, some of which are mine, and some are others with whom I've had many conversations in order to gain their points of view. These books really do talk from the masses, which was another driving reason why I really wanted to write them. One of the strongest themes of these stories is that of bullying and victimization and the damage that it does cause. In the first 2 books, I used the village to reflect society, but as I reached the 3rd book, I also allowed the ripples to spread wider and brought in outside forces, such as the press. Abby is targeted by one reporter who has a lot of clout. He's aware of his reach and how to manipulate facts, which he does with great skill, twisting the words of others to create a narrative that is entirely fake. The first incident with the press, which is early in the book, is actually an old friend of Abby's and Deb's, and to be honest, his own personal story is actually quite shocking. But that does not prevent him from trying to grab headlines, and when he is fed the wrong information, he writes a trash piece on Abby and all of the other curios. Now the whole piece is sensationalized to a point where there's barely any truth in the article, and most of it is hearsay and fantasy. His justification for this, which is a very slanderous article, is that she's now a celebrity, and so therefore she's easy pickings. Abby turns the table on him and writes the truth about him, and he gets very upset and panics. Now the truth is, he does not like stories about him being written, whereas he's quite happy to write lies about someone else. The double standard is clear and quite obvious, and again, I have seen this happen a few times in my life with people that I know. I believe in a free and fair press, I hate censorship, and I do think that journalists have the right to put out stories that are factually accurate. And when they do, I will always defend their right to do so, in the hope that it is helping to inform the public. But what I do not like today, and I'm seeing it more and more, is where reporters feel that they can write anything and get away with it. Especially the way that they use fear to frighten people or blow things completely out of proportion by misrepresenting the actual facts. There is a responsibility when writing, and directly naming and shaming people on loose facts is very, very dangerous behaviour from people, to be honest, who are supposed to be professionals and know better. I highlight this further on in the book, where I use the case of Peter Ford, a powerful and abusive reporter, who, having read Ben's piece, decides to target Abby and her father. Edwin is innocent, but Peter Ford decides to try him in the court of public opinion and names him guilty and a criminal, even though no charges have been made or pressed against him. Edwin is actually cooperating with the police, but Ford uses that to slander him, and he makes it something it's not, which several members of the village latch onto and use against Abby. Now, this is not actually fiction. There's a good few famous people out there who've been attacked and had accusations made against them, which were never really proven, and no charges were ever made by any form of law enforcement, and yet the press destroyed their livelihoods and took away their ability to earn, which is what Peter Ford threatens to do with Abby if she does not do as he says. Now, there is at this moment quite an irony here, because at this moment, this kind of story is actually a kind of a current event where something very, very similar is now happening to another quite famous celebrity who has yet not been charged of anything. He should be innocent and proven guilty, and yet the court of public opinion has already deemed him guilty, and he is suffering because of it. So okay, in this particular event, I do kind of play up the story a little, and I do take advantage of the situation because, hey, I'm a writer, and I use a good amount of fiction to create a resolution which is actually coding cube. Now, hackers can actually achieve what Edwina does, because I know, because I asked them if it was possible, I'm very fortunate that my wife knows one or two very gifted computer techs. But what I wanted to do with this part of the story was just to show how manufactured lies can be extremely harmful and very, very destructive, not just from the press, but also from everyday people such as Marjorie. This whole thing goes full circle. Marjorie starts the rumours, people believe them and begin to talk, and then the local reporter gets wind of it and he writes a story which then attracts the attention of a famous national daily reporter who then takes on his version of the story. It really is no different to that of Chinese whispers. Each time the story is told, it grows and changes and becomes nothing like that of the original story. This actually happens a great deal in real life. I see it every day within normal society as gossip is rife and those who are actually secretly immoral slander and call those who they're either jealous of or simply think they're pretty good targets. The scary thing is this hangs around for a long, long time, and it always comes back to constantly beat people down, as you see in this book and others with Abigail. I find it really ironic that I've seen this a few times in my life where a person will catcall someone else for doing exactly what they've been doing in secret. It's almost as if they attack this person in an attempt to hide their own shameful behaviour, and it breeds a kind of immoral superiority as they hide behind their shield of fake morality and supremacy. When I sit and I think back at times, and when I look at the spirit of community and support from the days of my youth, and then I compare it to the world I'm seeing now today, I find it's changed such a great deal. Society really is so very different. And if I'm really honest, there's a part of society I feel lacks basic decency. It does feel like it's kind of a dying type of behaviour at times. It feels to me like there is more hate in the world today, and there's certainly more division and shaming on scales that, as a young man, I did not even think were possible. This again is highlighted in the way the village attacks and shames Abigail and her friends, and I wonder if those who read these stories see that, and it makes them consider it, and also consider the behaviour of those around them, because I really hope so. I hope my words challenge people to really sit up and look at life with a more, let's just say, less judgmental eye. The Curio Chronicles is about the darkness and the light. And to a degree, today I've highlighted some of the darkness hidden within these stories. And so it's probably only right, actually, that, with this next book, which is due out soon, I will also turn my attention and look at the light, which plays a greater role in this next book that's coming. Now, as I've said, book 4 is really the turning point of the story, but it does walk into a place where the truth of Abby and Birch really start to shine through. I've always said that within these books, when you peel back the humour, the innuendo and the pain, you'll actually discover that underneath is a very, very beautiful story of life and love. Abby's story is a love story, but so is that of the Curios, because it also highlights the love of friends who gelled and became more like a family. In book 2, Birch tells Abby that the house will be a house of love, and she's right. It does become that, as we've already seen in the great acts of kindness that come from Birch and also from Abigail. The sheer power of the friendships and the support that they give each other really start to shine out of them in this 4th book, as we see them reach out to each other and help each other to get through some really difficult and tough situations and problems. This is Abby's story, and she's getting married. And as I set out to do, the group have matured since the very first book, which in this fictional world is now actually a time frame of about 10 years. So there are now internal changes, and in many ways this is not just a story of life. It is to a degree a kind of coming of age story, or at least it is in the first 2 books. Abby in this book is now 29 years old, and like all of the others, she is changing as she moves towards her 30s. Her behaviour, while still fun, is a little bit more restrained, as we see in the way she explains her thoughts to everybody. She clearly thinks things through more, and she's less prone to sort of sudden cravings to do very, very crazy things. And as we see with her sexually, she's kind of matured now, and she really is now only interested in her life with Birch, as many of her sort of wild behaviours from the past have been and gone. And she looks back with a little bit of regret at her past of sexual encounters. The relationship between Abby and Birch is a really strong one. It really is genuine love, and that really starts to show through this 4th book. Now, it was important to me when writing all 5 books that I showed a strong relationship. After all, I'd written Robbie and Runestone in House of the Kingdom, but what I also wanted to do was to show that, what is seen as the old stereotypical roles are no longer that powerful, because a good relationship can exist between 2 people no matter what. The fact that they're both female is almost airbrushed over. It's the power and the strength of their bond that shines through, which was my point in choosing to write the books this way. Love is love, and it matters not what the coupling is. All love is sacred and special. I do something similar with the naked lifestyle. It's not plastered all over the book. It's just there, a non-sexual part of life bobbing along in the background with all the other undercurrents of the story. The point here is that it's fine to have some self-worth and love the skin you're in, because ultimately we are born as we see ourselves, and so being positive and embracing that is actually the most healthy attitude to hold for yourself. The book really highlights change for the Curios. All of them now have jobs and careers and are running a large, expensive house, which comes with a lot of responsibilities. They all have, stepped up into the spotlight, and they're more aware of any repercussions that could follow any wilder than acceptable behaviour. Now while still prone to anxiety and self-doubt, at times Abby's stronger and more resolute in her beliefs, and with a lot of successes from her books, she's devoted to her craft of writing and takes greater joy out of the fans that she's earned when she meets them. Another aspect that becomes far more apparent is also her business skills. Abby is more on the ball and in tune with the publishing world, and she's learned a great deal in her time as an author, which, coupled with her ability to work alongside Birch on their large charitable projects, it's allowed her skills to develop and grow. Abby is actually quite a shrewd businesswoman and a good negotiator, which are all based in her youth watching her parents, who taught her far more than she actually realised as she watched them organise for the council or work out accounting. The group have grown up compared to book 1, and where back then sex was high on the agenda, there is a defined change, as they are now more aware of feelings and emotions which play a much bigger role in their life now. Now, below all of the fun and the frolics, there does lie what is actually a very beautiful storyline, which is the contrasting tale of darkness and light, played out through the deep and close bonds of Dudley and Birch. Abby has the ability to feel very strong and deep, as does Birch, and their union is a deeply moving one. The book will get emotional, and there will, I hope, be a few tears between the laughter and giggles, because their story is actually a very unique and powerful one. They both face what for them will be a massive change to their lives, And with that, they begin to see much better and well-defined aspects in their own lives, especially within their role of contributions that they make to village life. Their friendships are strong, but there again, they do have tests to their loyalties, as even through this book, which is about planning and executing a wedding, their eyes are opened once again as they face adversity. I mean, after all, this is the Curio Chronicles, and a smooth ride with no bumps in the road would not really fit in with the rest of the books. To a degree, they face problems from places they never really expected it, which I think really is another very essential ingredient to life today. Book 4 moves the story forward a great deal, and you really start to understand the evolution and fluidity of the lives that a lot of people live today. More threads from the first 3 books will come together, and as they do, you will really start to understand how everything in the first 3 books was actually written for a very good reason, and it is a part of a very important jigsaw that fits together across the whole of the series of stories, which in itself is one huge story on its own. Each book is a separate and fascinating read, but when the series is complete and you read every single book back to back, which I've now done quite a few times, it becomes a much more powerful tale to be told of a very real and inspirational life. The Curio Chronicles is a story that I'm really thrilled with, because they do highlight an awful lot of the contradictions of society and all of the greed and controlling behaviour of others. In many ways, it does make a good study of what life is and how life can actually be lived. And it goes, very much to the heart of understanding who we all are and what is our place in the world that surrounds us. In many ways, I think it does ask the question of what is a role in life, and do we have the knowledge and inner strength to succeed in life, which are very important questions that we should all ask ourselves. Again, the focus of the book is Abby, because this is her life and her journey as I laid out in book 1, and I plan to follow her on her own voyage of discovery over the other books that follow. And I think in a sense it's kind of like Hans Cottage. This book does hold clues and wisdom that may be helpful to the readers, which has always been something as a writer I felt was a really important part of the things that I published. I really am looking forward to getting the 4th book out, and I am actually quite excited that there is now a growing following of these books and people that will read it, and hopefully they will enjoy it. Abigail's wedding is coming. It is the 4th in the Curio Chronicle series, and I'm really looking forward to seeing how all of the readers receive it. Again, I say this every week. Thank you for listening. If you've not liked or subscribed to the channel, please do, because that just helps push that viral reach and get more and more people coming to the site and listening to the things that I sort of talk about, be it about reading, writing, books, or life in general. I'm always looking to try and find interesting stuff that makes people think. As you've seen today with the Curio Chronicles, there's an awful lot in those books to really make people think about life and also themselves. And that has always been the aim behind the podcast. So if you've enjoyed it, yes, please do like, do subscribe, tell your friends, and send them a link. I'll be back next week with something equally as interesting, and I hope to see you all there soon. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Writer Life podcast. If you have enjoyed this episode, or there are areas of Robin's stories you would like him to discuss, please add your thoughts and questions in the comments, and we will include them in a future episode. You can follow Robin on all his social media links, which you will find listed below, and please, like and subscribe to this channel, so you get the latest notifications when he posts. All Robin's books are available in digital and print formats to purchase or download through all online book sales sites.